If you're new to Premiere Pro, or you just haven't taken the time to learn all of the preferences, then optimizing Premiere Pro to run as smooth as possible so that you can edit as smooth as possible could be a bit of a challenge. So what do you say? Today, we jump into Premiere Preferences, modify what needs to be modified so you don't have to spend another minute worrying about it. Hey guys, I'm Patrick Fuller, and we have spent the last 10 videos learning Premiere Pro. Now that you have a good handle on the editing process and all the major tools within Premiere, it is time to tweak this thing to max performance. Because trust me, the last thing you want is to put all this time and effort into building something great, only to be frustrated with how slow Premiere is becoming. Now in preferences, there's only a handful of things that we really want to focus on, but we're going to start with general. So in general, the two things that I like to have unchecked is display color management and extend dynamic range monitoring. And the reason for this is basically if you don't have a high-powered laptop, you're not going to get the most out of this. And if you've already been coloring, then adding all that contrast to display color management might really mess you up. So keep it unchecked for now. Next up is appearance. There's really not much here. Now in audio, there's quite a few things that I want to make sure that we cover. And the first thing is making sure the play audio while scrubbing is checked. Now, this is really important because as you're scrubbing your timeline, I personally like to listen to what's going on, especially if I'm trying to match something visually to a beat. The next one here, maintain pitch while shuttling. I think this is really important because as I'm scrubbing the timeline, I don't really want to hear squirrel sounds, squeaky sounds. I want to hear the same pitch, albeit faster. I also like to make sure automatic waveform generation is checked and render audio when rendering video. Next up is audio hardware. And this is where you can actually change where you want your sound to come from. Autosave is critical. I like to save my work every 10 minutes. And the reason I like to do that is because as you start to edit faster, you can actually get a lot done in 10 minutes. Now, the other thing I like to do is have a maximum project versions. I'm going to change mine from 12 to 20 here. And the reason for that is as Premiere saves those project versions, they're tiny files. So having 15 or 20 of them at a time really doesn't take up much space, and it allows me to go back pretty far. Now, keep in mind that I also version my projects inside the sequences, so it's not as big of a deal for me, but it's still just a safety net. Capture, collaboration, control surface, device control, and graphics, there's really not much to mention here. Labels I'm a huge fan of. I like to actually change my labels for things that I want them to be used for. Media is pretty important, starting with the intermediate media time base. I like to keep mine at 23.976, basically 24 frames per second. The next big thing here is to make sure the enabled proxies is checked. We went through a whole video about creating proxies. You definitely want to have this checked because it will be a lifesaver. And then last but not least here, I have enable hardware accelerated decoding as checked. It will require a restart, no big deal. So let's jump right up to media cache, because there's a couple things that are really important to understand. The first thing to understand is that Premiere Pro works best if you can take all of the cache files and peaking files and those kind of things and move them off the hard drive, where the operating system is. Now that's if your extra hard drive has enough speed to handle it. So for me, I have an external hard drive called blank. I can come down here, I choose blank. I've got a folder in here called __ media cache, and all of the media cache for basically all of Adobe products go in there. Now, you also want to make sure that media cache database is on a separate drive other than your OS. I keep mine in the same place as all of my media cache. And this last piece here, this media cache management, I like to keep this second option checked and have it automatically delete it. And I choose 7 days because after about 7 days, I'm either done with the video or I probably need to create some new cache files because I've moved away from it and come back to it. Memory is pretty simple. You want to allocate as much memory to Premiere or Adobe products as you can. Playback and sync, really not much to talk about here, but if we jump into timeline, there's actually quite a bit to cover. So first things first, still image default duration. When you add images to your timeline, it will default them to 3 seconds. So now if you wanted to change that for whatever reason, so as you drop a new image onto your timeline, it goes to 5, 8, 10 seconds, or maybe even 1 second if you're trying to make something really fast. You could do that here and then just change it back. The next thing is this timeline playback auto scroll. You've got three options: no scroll, which doesn't make any sense to me, page scroll, and smooth scroll. Now, page scroll will allow you to move that playhead as necessary. The downfall to that is as that playhead comes all the way to the end, you're gonna have to kind of slide that timeline over. Smooth scroll, on the other hand, basically keeps the playhead dead center and then moves the timeline for you. The next thing here I want to definitely make sure is checked is snap playhead in timeline when snap is enabled. Now, there's two other things that I like to make sure are not checked, and that is at playback end, return to the beginning when restarting playback, and play after rendering previews. Now, the return to beginning setting is actually really frustrating because by the time you get to your timeline, instead of stopping there, it's gonna flip and start at the beginning and then start again, which is maddening. And the play after render previews is actually confusing to me. I'm not sure why you would do that, but basically what it is after you render a file, it's going to then start playing that. So if you click the render button and walk away for a few minutes, and all of a sudden it starts playing, you're gonna be like, and then last here in our list, before we get to media cache, is trim. Not much to talk about there. If you're interested in my favorite tips and tricks for editing in Premiere Pro, then check out my next video. If you got something out of this video, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in the next one. In terms of preferences.